Today I'm going to show you exactly when and how to change your guitar strings the right way. The goal of this video is simple: how to properly change your guitar strings. If you don't know how to change your guitar strings, then this video is for you. If this is your first time changing your guitar strings, it's probably a good idea to have your guitar teacher help you. If you don't have a guitar teacher, simply head down to your local music shop and they should be happy to help. If you find this video helpful, please like and subscribe below for even more videos. We can all agree there's nothing quite like the sound of a freshly strung guitar. Not only do they sound better, but they play and feel better too. And let's face it, this is a skill that every guitar player should have. The good news is, you don't need any special training or tools to get the job done. Now, you could pay someone like me to do this for you, or you can save your hard-earned money and reinvest back in yourself. Grab a new book or invest in some high-quality guitar coaching. You may be asking yourself, how often should I change my guitar strings? And that's a great question. And the answer, well, is it depends. Generally speaking, I change my guitar strings anytime there's a significant change in humidity and temperature. And we can kind of say that that is about every season. Or anytime you have any significant sound issues with your guitar, i.e. a lot of string buzz like this. Any dead notes, any corrosion on the strings, or maybe oxidation in the fret wires. Now before we get started, I want to show you my setup over here. Alright, so here's my setup. It's pretty basic and straightforward. I've got a wood table with a rubber mat. I've got a neck cradle, which you'll see how we use that in just a moment. I've got a set of Allen wrenches that we might need, and I'll show you when and why we might need them. Now, your guitar probably came with its own set of Allen wrenches, so you can look in your case to see if you got your set. The strings that I'm going to be putting on this guitar are D'Addario Phosphor Bronze acoustic strings. This is a 12 gauge light, and we'll talk a little bit more about guitar strings in just a moment. I've got my chromatic tuner, which we're also going to need once the new strings are on to get the guitar back in tune. Now you don't need this tool, but I find it very useful. This is a string winder, and I'll show you exactly how we use it. This is by Planet Waves. So it's a string winder plus a cutter, so we can cut the ends off the strings once the new set is on the guitar. It's pretty neat. Now, anytime you're changing your strings, it's a good idea to give the guitar a good cleaning. So I have some basic guitar polish. This is a Dunlop 65. You can get this in a kit with other polish and foam and everything else, conditioner. But any furniture polish will do if you don't have this on hand. The other very important tool that I have here is some lemon oil. Again, you can get this from your guitar shop or any furniture store, and I'll show you exactly what we do with this. And finally, I just have a run-of-the-mill rag, and that's pretty much it. And that's pretty much all you need to change your guitar strings. Now, before we start haphazardly taking things apart, I want to point out a few things about the guitar, so that way we're speaking the same language. First thing you'll notice is that the guitar is sitting up on the neck cradle. It literally just fits right in the little wedge there, and it'll sit nice, and that'll keep the guitar off the table itself. And that's important because you don't want to put any extra stress on the neck. So we'll start out by just talking about a few parts of the guitar. As I'm sure many of you know, this big part here is called the body. The strings run across from the body across the neck, and they wind on the machine heads here on the headstock. Now, the strings, as you can see, are sitting inside these holes on the bridge, and they're being held in place by the bridge pins, and they run across the saddle. We'll talk a little bit more about the saddle in just a minute, because there's a few points that we need to definitely discuss. So we're just about ready to remove the old strings. Whether this is your first time changing strings or not, maybe you've done it 100 times, it's probably a good idea to take a look at exactly how the strings are wound here at the headstock, because you don't want to inadvertently put one string in the wrong place, because you'll have some troubles then. So basically what happens, we have the 6th string, or the fat string, coming up to this first machine head, and you'll notice that the string is wound in a downward direction, and generally what you want to see is about 3 to 5 wraps around the machine head. The 5th string is in the middle, the 4th string is here at the very top. Now going the other way now, the 3rd string, the G string, is also at the top. The 2nd string is in the middle, and the 1st string is on the end. I've actually strung a guitar before where I accidentally put the 3rd string over here, and well, let's just say I had to go buy some new strings, because that wasn't going to work. So just make sure that you're paying attention to these things. Take a look at your guitar specifically as to the arrangement of all the strings. Now we're ready to take off these old nasty strings. This is a pretty straightforward process. All I'm going to do is unwind the strings by basically loosening the tuning knob all the way out. I pull the string out of the hole, and that's it. And then it'll be completely off of the headstock. I'm going to use my trusted string winder for the job, just to make it a little bit easier. So I'm just loosening the string, and you can see it starting to unwind from the machine head. And once it gets to about this point, you can just pull the string right off. And that's the gist of it, and I'm just going to do that for the rest of the strings. Alright, so we got the strings off the headstock, and now all we have to do to get these old strings off is just take them out of the bridge itself. Now, a lot of times these bridge pins get stuck, and actually I was having to fight with one of them here for a second. But basically, once the strings are out of the way, you can probably reach your hand inside the sound hole and push up on the bridge pins. They should pop right out. So once the bridge pins are loose, you just take the bridge pin out, and the string will come with it. And as you can see, the string has a ball on the end of it, and it sits inside this bridge pin just like that, pretty much. All right. So now we'll just take out all the strings. Try not to drop them, because they can be hard to find. All right. Now that the strings are out, these kind of just float and could fall out pretty easy if you were to turn the guitar over. So make sure that you keep track of them. So you might be asking yourself, well, what do I do with the old strings? Well, that's a good question. You could try and wind them up and just throw them away, but oftentimes, because the strings are made out of metal, they're like a spring. So when they're wound up, they'll spring out and kind of get all over the place. I oftentimes used to find strings kind of popping out of the trash can, and it's a good way to prick your finger. So something that I like to do, and I actually picked this up from my father, is I take an old can of something. This was a old hot cocoa can from the holidays. I cut a slit in the lid of the can, and then I simply just, starting with the ball end of the string, just start to slide it in. Doing this will make it real easy to throw the strings away when you're all said and done. All right, so now that we got the old strings off, I want to show you a couple of the adjustment points that I was talking about in the beginning of the video. So the neck actually has a rod that runs through it, and that's what kind of keeps it from, cracking. The adjustment point for the neck is through a socket with an Allen wrench, which is specific size for your guitar. Oftentimes, you'll see the socket inside the sound hole, right underneath the neck. You may also see it, depending on the guitar you have, you might see it up here at the headstock with a little plastic cover with 2 or 3 screws kind of blocking it. The other point that we may need to adjust is here at the nut. Especially if you are using heavier or thicker strings, you might have to file out the nut just a little bit. On an acoustic guitar, the last point that we can really adjust is the saddle. It may need to be filed down or filed along the string. Now, I highly recommend that you have a professional guitar technician do these sorts of adjustments for you, because you can actually damage the guitar pretty easily if you're not too careful. One more side note about the saddle is that most saddles aren't glued into the bridge. So if you were to flip the guitar over, like to clean it or something, the saddle may fall out. Now that could be a problem because the saddle is oriented a certain way for the specific guitar. So if you're going to flip the guitar over, either hold on to it or set it aside knowing which way it should be oriented. Now that the strings are off and we've talked about the adjustment points, it's a great opportunity to give the guitar a nice thorough cleaning. And I highly suggest that you do this anytime you change your strings. Get that furniture polish out or that guitar polish and just go to town all over the body and on the back of the neck. You don't really want to put furniture polish or anything like that on the fretboard because the fretboard is actually untreated wood. So what we're going to use for the fretboard is the lemon oil. If you have a guitar neck made out of maple or rosewood like this one, lemon oil will do just fine. If you have a guitar neck made out of ebony, the lemon oil can be used to clean the fretboard, but it's not going to be absorbed by the wood because it's not porous enough. So don't be afraid if you see some of the oil being absorbed into the guitar neck. That's perfectly normal and actually what we want. This particular guitar neck is pretty dehydrated, so it's going to be happy once we put some lemon oil on. So I'm going to do that right now.
It doesn't matter if you're changing strings on an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar. The process is the same. The only real difference is on an electric guitar, the strings aren't held in place with a bridge pin. They normally come in through the back of the body through 6 holes, one for each string, from the underside of the bridge and sit along their own saddle. Take a look at your guitar to see how it's set up.
I've already cleaned the top, the sides, and the back of the guitar with some guitar polish. Now it's time to clean and rehydrate the fretboard with our lemon oil. Like I said, you can get this at any guitar shop or furniture store. This particular one I like a lot because there's a little pad inside here that we can just go directly onto the fretboard. We don't have to worry about sprays and all that kind of thing. So this is a pretty simple process. You just kind of squeeze the bottle a little bit and make sure you get on the fret as well as the fret wire. And this will give everything a nice good cleaning and rehydration. And as we do this, you may notice the liquid itself being absorbed by the fretboard. If you get some liquid that runs off to the back of the neck, that's not a big deal. You just kind of wipe that away with a rag. So we're going to let that sit for a few minutes, kind of let it soak in a little bit, and then we'll get started on putting the new guitar strings on. Now we're all set to put on the new strings. We've made some adjustments, cleaned the guitar, rehydrated, and cleaned the fretboard. So all that's left is put the strings on. When you take the strings out of the package, they'll be kind of wound up like this in a circle. You'll also see that each string has a different color ball on it. Now, fortunately, on the front side of the package, you'll see that each string is labeled with which color is which. So in this case, the fat string that's closest to you when you're holding the guitar, the low E string, this one is the color brass. The A string is red, the D string is black, the G string is green, the B string is purple, and the high E string is silver. So make sure you hold on to this. You definitely don't want to get confused as to which string is which. Now what I like to do is I keep the package close by so I can reference it pretty easily. I'm going to start with the fat string, the low E string. So I'm just going to carefully unwind the strings from themselves. I'm going to verify that I have the low E string, which this is brass. Now I'm also going to verify that I'm putting the correct string in the correct hole in the saddle. So obviously this is the top end of the guitar that's closest to you, so you're going to want to put it right here into this hole. So you take the bridge pin out, Now it doesn't really matter the orientation of the ball because it's going to sit inside the saddle the same way. So I'm going to just go ahead and put the ball in. I don't know if you can see the little groove here. The string sits in the groove of the bridge pin. So I put the string down, I put the bridge pin in, and then I pull up on the string to make sure that the string is all the way seated in the saddle. If you don't do that, and there's some slack in there, when you go and tighten the string on the other end, you'll think you have enough length, and then it'll pull out, and you'll have some real issues with length if you don't do that. Now you could put all the strings in at once, and then on one side, and then tighten them all up on the other side. What I like to do is I like to put in the first 3 set of strings, and then go to the other side and tighten them up, and then the next set of strings. It makes it a little bit easier, and then you don't have strings flying all over the place. So the next string that we want is going to be the red string. So I happen to set that one over here. So this is the 5th string. And as you can see, this ball is red. So you repeat the same process by just taking the bridge pin out, putting the string inside the hole, making sure the string sits in the groove of the bridge pin, and just pushing it down and pulling it out. Now you saw all that slack that came out. Now you know that the string is completely seated. The D string in this case is black, and it's wound up against the G string. So you just take these guys apart, get the black one, and repeat. All right, now all 6 strings are on inside the saddle, or inside the bridge rather, and now we're ready to get going. I'm going to start with the fat 3 strings first, and then we'll move on to the skinnier strings. One quick point about choosing guitar strings. Like as I mentioned earlier, it really is personal preference as to which guitar string you choose. If you've never chosen a guitar string before, you heard me say that the ones we're going to use today are 12 gauge. And what that means is the skinniest string is 0.012 of an inch, or 12 thousandths of an inch. So when you go into a guitar shop and ask for guitar strings, you say, hey, I want 12 gauge or 13 gauge or 10 gauge or whichever. What you're referring to is the thinnest string. Now, the thicker the string, the warmer the guitar is going to sound, especially on an acoustic guitar. However, the downside is it might be a little bit harder on your fingers to press down on the strings because there's a little bit more resistance there. And one final note on guitar strings is that if you're going from one side string to another, the guitar will probably need to be adjusted through the neck, maybe the nut, possibly the saddle, in order to get the action and everything the way it was before. So now we're at the headstock, and what I did is I made all the holes where the strings go facing the body of the guitar. That'll just make it easier when we put the strings in. We won't have to be searching around trying to find where the hole is. So if you remember in the earlier part of the video, I showed you exactly how the strings are wound and where they're placed. So if you'll remember, the fat low E string is going to go into this first one right here. Again, you don't want to put it up here because you'll have some serious problems. So basically what happens is the strings come in and they go inward as they go in. So as you come up, the strings are going inward in relation to the headstock. So here's our fat E string. Now what you need to do, you send it through the hole. Now it's not going to be sitting quite on the saddle just yet because it's not tight enough. But it should be in the nut. That's important. Now you can't, or shouldn't I should say, you should not have this wound just like that because it'll wind about half a turn and that'll be it. You need to have at least 3 winds on the string because what that does is that optimizes the angle between the nut and the machine head. So what you'll need to do is pull out some slack with your other hand. Okay? What I did, as you can see, is I've got about 3 inches or so on the other side. And you'll see exactly why that's important here in just a moment. With the fatter strings, you know, 3 winds is fine. With the skinnier strings, you might, definitely want to shoot for 4 or 5. So basically what I'm doing is I'm putting some pressure down here on the front end of the string, and I'm pulling against the bridge pin with my other fingers. And that's going to keep us a little bit more taut on the back side of the guitar, as well as give us that slack that we need on the headstock side. Now we're ready to wind. All right, when you're at this point, you can stop. You don't need to wind it up all the way to tune. We'll have plenty of opportunities to do that in a minute. Plus, even if you try to, it wouldn't make a lot of noise just yet. Now, I don't cut this piece off. You can. I just choose not to, just in case I did make a mistake. I have an exit strategy. So now I'm going to grab the 5th string, and I'm going to do the same thing. Notice how the string winds downward, and having your finger here is also going to help that process. Now, once the string starts getting taut, I make sure that the string is sitting inside the nut properly. Now, just a second ago, I had to stop because the bridge pin was starting to pop out, which is perfectly normal. That will happen, and that just means the string might not have been seated all the way like we thought it was. All right, so that's number 2. And you just repeat this process for the rest of the strings. Now, when you're going to put in the 3rd string, remember the 3rd string goes at the top. So you don't want to accidentally put it down on the bottom, because you'll have some serious troubles if you do that. So you go ahead, put it in the top. Now keep in mind that you want the string on the inside of the machine heads. You don't want it out here, okay? You want it on the inside of the machine heads, placed in the nut. And here you might want to take out about 3-4 inches from the neck, so that way you can have plenty of space to get a few more winds out of it. Now, it's also important to note that the direction in which you turn the machine heads, or the tuning knobs rather, is going to change from the top to the bottom set of strings. Again, you want the strings to sit inward, so in order to accomplish that, you need to turn it the opposite way. All right, and then you just do the same thing here. Again, you want to make sure the strings wind downward, so that means the end should be on top of the string that's being wound, because otherwise it'll start winding upward or start getting tangled up, and you don't want that. Also, while you're doing this, you're kind of watching the bridge pins to make sure they don't pop out, because you don't want to get hit in the face with a bridge pin. And then you follow the same process here. Again, you put the string in the nut, make sure it's on the correct side, the inside of the machine heads. Give it a little slack. Make sure the string is winding downward. Now this time, again, I have a little bit more slack on these skinnier strings, so I can get a little bit more wind out of them. Now, if you're using a string tuner or a string winder, be sure not to apply too much force onto the tuning knob with the arm that you're using to tune the strings up, because you don't want to accidentally snap off the tuning knob. All right, good job. You've successfully changed your strings. But before we tune the guitar, we need to do one more thing. As you recall, the strings were wound in a circle in the package. and these are obviously made out of metal. So metal tends to become compressed when it's sitting in one position for too long. So if you were to try and tune the guitar right now, it wouldn't stay in tune very well. So what we need to do is get rid of some of the compression in the string. This can be accomplished in several ways. Kind of the way that I like to do it is I just take a string, wind it up, wind it down. Now you got to be careful. You don't want to, do it too much to the point that you break a string. Once you've done that to all the strings, the next step that you can do real quick is basically put your finger on the 7th fret and just pull against, and you can actually hear the string changing tune as I'm doing that. So you just pull up on the string, and look, that string has already got pretty much all the compression out of it. And this will now stay in tune a lot easier. Doing this also makes sure that the strings are seated all the way inside the bridge. You can go ahead and do that on the other side. Just real quick like. And you're set. All we have to do now is tune. All right, so now I've got this guitar in tune, and really that's all there is to it. Now your guitar will sound good as new again.